And thanks so much for joining us for this middle of the week edition, Wednesday's edition of Alaska Weather on the 27th day of October 2021. I'm Dave Percy. Up first on right to satellite imagery, we've got right to satellite imagery. There we go. We've got a kind of a thin band of clouds there, so we've got a little pressure over the northern Bering Sea, just north of the Pribilofs, west-southwest St. Matthew Island. Putting that into motion there, you can see it pushing in across Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, and then into the southwest interior, and then kind of stalling out there along the Yukon Delta, or over the Yukon Delta, and south of the river. Otherwise, low clouds covering much of the Bering Sea as cold air pours out of the Russian Far East. And then through the Bering Strait today, gusts of 32 miles an hour to the north across St. Lawrence Island, with some light snow going on off and on throughout the day today, but less than a quarter of an inch or so accumulation at the most. So light snow amounts there, and light snow showers occurring over the Pribilof Islands, that cold air streaming westward, or to the east-southeast, behind the weak front there, the weak boundary, and getting some light snow showers, temperatures just a shade above freezing at both St. Paul and St. George, with west winds gusting as high as 46 miles an hour at St. George Island today. And that brought about 0.13 of an inch of precipitation to Cold Bay. Pilot Point picked up 0.03 of an inch, and Cape Newnham had 0.2 of an inch of rain. So really just kind of a weak system there, and then a break up over the western interior. And then a little pressure keeping light snow going for the northern Seward Peninsula along the northwest coast, Noatak Valley today, with about an inch of snow falling in Kivalina today, and lighter amounts elsewhere in the northwest up there along the coast. And then a lot of moisture and clouds over the interior, but precipitation pretty sparse. Whatever fell was light, so a lot of light snow shower, flurry type activity over the mountainous terrain, very hit and miss, and otherwise pretty much dry Copper River Basin. So moisture lifting northward did bring some light rain this afternoon into Cordova. They picked up about 0.03 of an inch as of 3 p.m., while Middleton Island had just under half an inch with 0.44 inches. Then a band of moisture lifting northward there across the Panhandle. That brought just under half an inch of rain to Sitka, and about 2/3 of an inch fell at Petersburg today, with lighter amounts kind of becoming more showery and tapering off down over Prince Wales Island this afternoon, and pretty much dry up to the north, just light rainfall amounts up Juneau to Haines and over toward Yakutat. Next system starting to increase the wind and rain over the far western Aleutians. That's mostly going to slide by just to the south of the Aleutian chain there, as the main low center tracks eastward or east-southeast and then recurves south of Kodiak Island as a strong southerly jet develops from the northeast Pacific right up into southern Alaska by Friday evening. Otherwise, starting out today, low pressure off the southwest coast there looks a lot more impressive than it is. A lot of light moisture, light precipitation, as I mentioned there, falling right on up through the Bering Strait, and then that weak low keeping light snow going today along the northwest coast, Kivalina, Point Hope, and those areas, but otherwise kind of a variably cloudy to clear in some areas along the north slope and the Arctic coast, with light winds. Winds did gust Tooksuk bad in the northeast to 41 miles an hour with that low, and then west-southwest gust 35 over the Alaska Peninsula, stronger over the Pribilofs, as I mentioned, winds 45 miles an hour in gusts. Low pressure southeast coast, that band lifting northward tonight will kind of lighten up on the precipitation, but it won't end completely. Stays kind of unsettled for the southeast coast. Continued weak southwest flow, another trough there off the coast. North Gulf Coast, same thing. Mostly dry over the interior. Some scattered snow showers there. Kobuk, Koyukuk Valley, Yukon Flats, mostly north of the river there. And then drying out a little bit for the Yukon Delta, Seward Peninsula, but that low keeping light snow going for the northwest coast into the Noatak Valley. Flurries, fog along the Arctic coast at times. And wind and rain does enter the central Aleutians tonight. That low just close enough, but then kind of drops off to the southeast there. And mostly just breezy conditions from Adak, Atka, and look for an increase in the winds for the Fox Islands tomorrow. Hopefully staying dry. Hopefully the rain shield staying to your south. May just a little bit nudge northward there, and you'll be into the rain. Otherwise, showers Kodiak Island, rain, light rain or showers, mixed variety, North Gulf Coast, and depending on your elevation, of course, into the northern Panhandle. Light rain and showers for all of the southeast coast, mostly dry in the interior now. Flurries continue there for the Arctic coast. Outlook for Thursday, strong south to north flow. You can see 973 millibar low south of the Alaska Peninsula, and strong southerly jet with that frontal boundary pushes heavy wind and rain into Kodiak Island throughout the day and up to the North Gulf, western North Gulf, or actually southern Kenai Peninsula, Barren Island, southern Cook Inlet late in the afternoon. And then that'll push even farther northward into southern Alaska during the overnight period Friday with increased winds, warmer temperatures, and good shot of rain in the upslope areas. Lows tonight in the 30s to lower 40s for the southeast coast, down into the single numbers for the northern Kuskokwim Valley, Copper River Basin, otherwise teens for the Susitna Valley, Matanuska Valley, and 20s Kenai Peninsula, mid-30s Kodiak Island, lower 20s Bristol Bay. Highs Tuesday afternoon, mid-20s Kuskokwim Valley, lower 30s Bristol Bay, lower to mid-30s South Central Alaska, and near 30 for the Copper River Basin, near 40 along the North Gulf Coast, and in the 40s for the southeast coast. Lows the following morning, Friday, about 5 there for the Copper River Basin, 10 to 15 Kuskokwim Valley, 15 to 23 for the Bristol Bay area, in the 20s South Central Alaska, mid-30s Kodiak Island, and in the 30s for the Panhandle. Followed by highs in the 40s, 45 to 50 down toward Klawock and Craig, and near 30 for the Copper River Basin, 35 to 40 South Central Alaska.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to the first line weather graphic for Thursday morning. IFR eastern and central Arctic coast, marginal VFR, North Slope, Brooks Range, and the eastern interior, some IFR over the Yukon Flats, and over the central eastern Copper River Basin down to the eastern North Gulf Coast. Band of IFR there across southwest Prince William Sound, southern Kenai Peninsula to Kachemak Bay, and some IFR northeast Bristol Bay, Lake Iliamna area. VFR Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, IFR just catching with that storm to the south, just catching the central Aleutians, VFR to the north, marginal VFR northeastern Bering Sea, Pribilof, St. Lawrence Island through the Bering Strait. And for the afternoon, marginal VFR in the Panhandle to start. That improves a little bit, especially along the central coast, Prince of Wales Island, southern areas, but stays marginal elsewhere. IFR increases for the North Gulf Coast, including Yakutat now, all of Prince William Sound, and into southern Cook Inlet. And still a patch of IFR up over the Yukon Flats, Porcupine River there where it meets up with the Yukon. And then a zone of VFR now from the North Slope, across the Brooks Range, southwestward all the way to the Yukon Kuskokwim Delta Coast, Kuskokwim Bay, Nunivak Island. Pribilof's all VFR. AKwx westward VFR, so looking really good out over the Bering Sea. IFR now having trouble reaching Nikolsky, right on the edge there, but marginal VFR for Unalaska Island back to Atka Island. VFR Kodiak Island, and that continues into Friday morning. Kodiak Island kind of in between marginal VFR zones there, with some IFR over Cook Inlet and the Matanuska-Susitna Valley, just south of Sitkinak, Trinity Islands IFR. And for the southeast coast, marginal VFR with IFR over towards Stewart and Hyder, and then areas of marginal VFR, some scattered IFR over the eastern interior with some scattered VFR as well. And for the afternoon, some marginal VFR along and north and west of the Yukon River Valley, northern Bering Sea marginal through the Bering Strait, catching Kivlina, Point Hope, Cape Lisburne, and some marginal VFR eastern Arctic coast. Otherwise, IFR with that push of warm air and moisture coming northward, all of Kodiak Island socked in with IFR. Aleutian Range up into southern Cook Inlet, southern Kenai Peninsula, Kachemak, Kamishak Bays, Resurrection Bay into Seward, up into western Prince William Sound, Portage, or Whittier looking IFR. Marginal VFR over south central Alaska. Copper River Basin VFR, north and west of the Alaska Range VFR. And the Panhandle looking pretty good, VFR. Aleutians, Bering Sea, VFR, including the Pribilofs. Anatuvik, marginal VFR becomes VFR, but Adigan call occasionally marginal throughout the entire day. And for the Lake Clark and Merrill passes, marginal VFR at times. And for rainy, occasionally marginal, but windy, optimistically, VFR the entire day. Isabel, marginal VFR. Mentasta, VFR. And for Tanita, marginal VFR at times. if not most of the time. And then portage, lowest conditions, eastern entrance, that's where your best chance of finding the IFR conditions there. The eastern approach, Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR. Freezing levels at the surface north of the Pribilofs, across Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast, southeastward through the Panhandle, 2,000 feet there toward Dixon Entrance, and 2,000 feet near or just south of the Central Aleutians. Icing, some mixed icing there, mostly of the light variety, Panhandle, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, moisture into Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula. And then the heavier moisture, heavier icing threat staying south of the Aleutians, icing free everywhere else. Jet stream, westerlies 85 to 115 knots there across southern Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, just clipping southern Kodiak Island. Otherwise, the strong jet off to the southeast. And southeast, south-southeast flow, 45 to 50 knots through the central interior. And at 9,000 feet, 40 to 45 knot winds around that low over the western Gulf. Pretty light over interior Alaska as well as the Panhandle. Northerlies 45 knots, west central Aleutians. And northeast 25 to 40 knots there, southern Bering Sea into the central Aleutians. Light winds over interior Alaska, but 40 knotters right along the eastern North Gulf Coast. And look for some considerable moderate turbulence with that zone of winds there for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Also pretty bumpy, considerable moderate turbulence, especially for small aircraft for the eastern Aleutians westward to Atka, Adak, and Amchitka, but smoothing out towards Shemya. Otherwise pretty smooth over interior Alaska. After the break, I'll be back with a look at the marine forecasts.
When I first started working here in the early 90s, this is where the glacier was. I mean, where we're walking right now would have been a pile of gravel that had been pushed up by the glacier, and then we would have had 100 to 200 foot high cliffs of ice right here. And as you can see, that's changed quite a bit. And if you look at that in 2 dimensions, you can sort of see the terminus used to be here, now it's back there. That gives you one measure. What that kind of 2-dimensional look doesn't show is how much mass has been lost, that the glacier has just sort of deflated. These 200-foot cliffs of ice have disappeared and pulled back to this gentle sloping glacier you see now.
When I was working in Kenai Fjords National Park, I used the topographic maps to navigate where I was, and I realized that the mapping of the glaciers was really off. The glaciers had receded a lot. There were new rivers and lakes that were establishing where the ice used to be or should have been according to the maps. And so then I did a study on this and found out that we had a 5% loss of glacier ice mass in the Kenai Fjords area between 1950 and 1985. Big change.
You know, one of the most compelling things we do, though, to document glacier change is simply take photographs. We've had repeat photography projects here at the park. They may not give you the most accurate data in terms of how much mass or real specific measurements, but what they do give you is a visual representation that can't be argued with. I mean, it really requires no interpretation.
Understanding what's happening, understanding these processes, and possibly being able to predict what's going to happen in the future is the best that we can do, and that requires science and research.
There's considerable research on climate change in Alaska. The most significant, I would say right now, is the Natural Resources Inventory and Monitoring Program, which is looking at change across a wide variety of vital signs or indicators.
Kenai Fjords National Park is actually a pretty good representation of what's going on globally with regards to glacier ice retreat. There have been studies showing that mountain glaciers are retreating all over the planet. There are probably well over 90% of the glaciers are in retreat status. There are a few that are advancing, and some are holding their terminus point. But at Kenai Fjords, the tidewater glaciers are retreating more dramatically, but even the land-based glaciers in the terminus positions are retreating. It's pretty common for all the mountain glaciers. The big mountain glaciers in Wrangell St. Elias National Park, they're mostly in retreat too. We're really entering an interesting phase where what we call the cryosphere, the ice on the planet, is is melting.
You know, in the more immediate past, it's clear that since the Pleistocene, glaciers have been retreating. So the idea that glaciers retreat is nothing, is no revelation. They've been retreating from across North America for the last 10,000 years. What appears to have changed and what has people's attention is the rate at which they're retreating. In the case of Exit Glacier, you know, we have scientists who've been looking at it. We have evidence that the glaciers left behind, or we can track that retreat for about the last 200 years. And we can say with confidence that in the last decade, that rate has increased.
Terminus mapping is a great way to map a small portion of the ice field. We come out twice a year and we use a GPS to walk the edge of the terminus and map the farthest extent of Exit Glacier. And that allows us to see what type of changes are occurring over the winter accumulation period and the summer ablation period. With that data, that can help us as we witness these changes within the ice field, we can hopefully be able to correlate that with the weather data that we have.
You know, when you look at an ice field that's 750 square miles, when you look at a glacier that towers hundreds of feet high, you get a sense of permanence. You think these things are massive, they're somehow a permanent sort of feature, and yet in a very short period of time, in a matter of a couple of decades, we've seen dramatic change in those things.
At Exit Glacier, we have a time-lapse camera set up on the glacier that allows us to take a couple photos every single day, and then to put that sequence of photos into a video where we can see changes of the glacier and the vegetation phenology throughout an entire year.
Virtually all the glaciers in Alaska are receding. Some glaciers are moving forward. That's not an indication that they're actually growing in size. It's just the rate at which they're slipping down the mountain.
In some cases, some of these glaciers are receding back up onto land, and so they're producing less ice. When you change the glacier systems, you're changing habitat for marine mammals and other wildlife. And the populations of harbor seals have dropped dramatically in the fjords. In 1980, shortly after the establishment of the park, in Ayalak Bay, we had maybe 1,500 harbor seals. Nowadays, you know, it's a few hundred.
In Arctic environments, much of the sunlight that reaches the Earth bounces back because it hits snow and reflects off into space, or ice on the ocean and reflects off into space. That's the albedo effect. When the snow thaws and instead you have rock or vegetation, or when the ice thaws and you have transparent ocean, the sunlight will convert to other wavelengths. It'll convert essentially to warmth. That does not bounce back into the atmosphere as much. So consequently, you get a warming of the ocean, you get a warming of the ground, you get a thawing of frozen soils or permafrost, you get a more rapid thawing of sea ice. So once the ice and once the snow is off of the surface, the rate of warming increases considerably.
If you're driving out to Exit Glacier, you'll actually start to see signs along the side of the road that have dates on them. Visitors sometimes are confused. They think they're elevations or something until they get up to the glacier and realize, oh, those were all date signs along the road that were telling me when the glacier was there. Another thing that's been happening in the Exit Glacier area in recent years is this flooding that comes at a time we're not used to. We're used to having maybe some flooding in the fall when we have a lot of heavy rain. This has suddenly been some flooding that's coming in the middle of the summer, usually not associated with precipitation events. It's associated with warmer weather and melting. When you walk down one of our trails that leads to Exit Glacier, there are a number of ways to get out there, but what used to be the main route is no longer really the main route because of the way the glacier has changed. So this main route to the glacier used to provide dramatic views of the glacier as you walk towards it. In fact, there was a large kiosk built at the end of this trail for people to stop and rest and enjoy the view of the glacier. Now, if they stop and rest at this kiosk, people think, why did the park put a kiosk here? Because it looks out at some shrubs. And there's no glacier within view anymore.
The way we solve big problems like this is not all at once. There's a thing called the Sokolov's wedges, and you just take a little bite of the pie, one sliver at a time. So we try to do incremental changes.
When we talk to people about our concerns about climate change, about the changes that are happening to the glacier, we also want to leave them with some idea of what we're doing to mitigate some of the effects of climate change. For example, here at the park, as we retire vehicles out of our fleet, we try to replace them with electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. We've done things like at the AKwx Nature Center, helping to sort of experiment and install a cutting-edge fuel cell as opposed to running some traditional power source out there that relies on some sort of more greenhouse producing gas.
My main hope for the future is that people get the message that the planet is changing fairly rapidly in places, particularly places like Kenai Fjords National Park, and that it is, we think, there's good evidence it's a result of atmospheric changes, which are measured in terms of human inputs into the atmosphere.
The rapid rate at which these glaciers are changing now offers us the opportunity to talk about this place as a way of looking into the future. In a lot of parts of the country, climate change issues are a little more subtle, and we can point here and say, look how fast this is changing. This is what the future holds for perhaps a lot of us and a lot of the planet as climate continues to change.
I'm optimistic that people and nature will adapt to change, but my expectation is that change will occur. Time will tell.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Coastal water forecast for the Panhandle, southeast coast there, south coast, southwest winds 20 to 25 knots, and the north coast, south winds 20 to 25 knots, seas running around 10 feet. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, small craft advisory, south winds 25 knots, seas 5 feet. And then central southern inner channels, looking at south winds 10 to 15 knots with 3 to 6 foot seas. And the outlook for Friday, southeast coast, on the south coast there, south 15 knots, north coast south to southeast 20 to 25 knots, and south 15 knots for Stevens or southeast at 15 for Stevens Passage. Northern inside waters and Clarence Strait south at 15 knots. Prince William Sound for tomorrow, east winds 20 knots. And small craft advisories for the western North Gulf Coast, south winds 25 knots. And small craft advisories for Cook Inlet, northerlies 25 to 30 knots, 7 to 8 foot seas. Small craft advisories for Camashack Bay, north at 25 knots. And the Middleton Island area, south winds at 20 knots with seas at 8 feet. Storm coming up, big increase in the winds in the forecast for Friday. Storm warnings for the eastern North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound from the east and southeast at 50 knots. Prince William Sound seas building to 12 feet and 20 feet for the eastern North Gulf Coast. 40 knot southeast winds in the forecast for the western North Gulf Coast and the Barren Islands, seas around 20 feet. East winds at 40 knots for Camashack Bay, southern Cook Inlet. Gale warnings, northeast 35 knots, north of the Forelands, a little lighter. Small craft advisories, northeast sustained at 30 knots. And for Kodiak Island, Thursday, west winds 20 knots. Small craft advisories, the Alaska Peninsula, west to northwest winds 25 knots. Light variable winds for Bristol Bay at 10 knots with seas around 6 feet. And for Friday, gale warnings for the Alaska Peninsula and northerlies 35 to 45 knots. 15 to 20 foot seas. Small craft advisories for Bristol Bay, north winds at 30 knots. Gale warnings for Kodiak Island, east side there, southeast at 40 knots, 23 foot seas, Shelikof Strait, northeast at 35 knots. And for the Fox Islands tomorrow, gale warnings, northeast winds 25 to 40 knots, seas running 7 to 13 feet. Gale warnings for Adak and Atka, strongest winds on the Pacific side of the islands there, up to 45 knots. Northeast 45 from Chitka Island, and north winds 30 knots from the area Kiska to Shemya. They'll swing around and lighten up on Friday, 15 knots from the southwest, Shemya to Kiska, west 20 knots, Amchitka Island, small craft advisories, Adak and Atka, northwest winds at 30 knots. Gale warnings for the Fox Islands, Unalaska Island seeing the strongest winds, out of the north, 35 to 40 knots, Umak Island, northwest, 30 to 35 knots. Southwest coast tomorrow, 15 knot winds from the north or northeast, northeast to 20 for the Pribilofs, north 15, St. Matthew Island, St. Lawrence Island, northwest winds at 20 knots. And for the day Friday, northwest winds 20 knots, St. Lawrence Island, Yukon Delta coast, small craft advisory south of Nunivak Island, north winds at 30 knots. Pribilof, small craft advisories, northwest at 25 and west 20 knot. West winds at 20 knots for St. Matthew Island. Up along the Arctic coast, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, light northeast winds 5 to 10 knots, seas 2 feet in the ice-free areas. Northeast 15 there for the central coast, and west side, western Arctic coast down to Cape Thompson, east winds at 15 knots with 3-foot seas. Small craft advisories, though, from Cape Thompson to Wales, west winds at 25 knots with 8-foot seas. Outlook for Friday, Wales to Cape Thompson, west winds 20 knots, otherwise winds out of the south at about 10 to 15 knots from Cape Thompson to the central coastal areas. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, west to southwest breeze at 10 knots with seas in the ice-free waters is up to 2 feet. For tonight, look for light winds with snow and flurries up there, and definitely cloudy skies to the Arctic coast into the North Slope. And with that persistent low down along the northwest coast, Noatak Valley, periods of light snow continue. Accumulations, though, less than an inch. Some snow shower possibilities there. Koyukuk Valley into the Yukon Flats, mostly north of the Yukon River. Dry to the south. Chance of rain or showers North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle. Next system grazing the Aleutians with gusty east winds and a chance of rain. That continues eastward. Tomorrow, just barely reaching the Aleutians. Low pressure keeps it unsettled for Kodiak Island. A trough keeps it unsettled for the southeast coast. And then on Friday, that storm strengthens. Wind flows become south to north into the western Gulf of Alaska, driving heavy wind and rain into Kodiak Island and to the southern Kenai Peninsula in the afternoon, southern Cook Inlet. Otherwise, dry over interior Alaska. Light snow and cooler temperatures continue over the eastern and northern Bering Sea.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.